Well, I'm very glad to be here. It's good to see you. I was here in March of the year, and we talked about the experiment with light and did a brief introduction to that meditation at that time. So it's very good to be back, and I'm humbled to be with you today. Some of the sources that we use in this are from other times and places. And so they're written in the language of those times and places. And I invite you to translate them into whatever works best for you. And I use Christian terminology, though not exclusively. And again, feel free to use whatever language that is meaningful and comfortable to you in this conversation. And what I'm going to do with each screen, I'm going to briefly share the screen to show you a slide. I'm the type of person, if I can read something while I hear it or think about it, it helps me take it in. So we will have the screen share briefly on each slide, and then we'll come back to the group, if that's okay. All right. And so what I've called this is the special thing we have as friends. And I think that not all friends look at what we have within the Religious Society of Friends as a contemplative practice, but it very much is so. There's a word called charism, and that word means a special grace or gift that's given to a group of people to be given and shared with the world, okay? And a lot of religious communities, let's take Catholic, for example, because they have a lot of them. You know, a lot of different traditions have different groups within the tradition. And so you have a lot of religious communities within the Catholic Church. You have like Franciscans are well known. Cistercians are pretty well known. They're a break-off group from the Benedictines and so forth and so on. So each one of those groups, the reason they are different from the others is because they've been given a different gift to bring to the world. It might be teaching. It could be missionary work. It could be taking care of homeless. It could be a life of prayer. So the experience of the living Christ, the inward light shining in our hearts and minds, is the charism that I believe was brought to friends. And this is a gift that is shared with the world. It's not just for Quakers. It's for anybody that is drawn to that. And so it's not something that they had and they held to themselves. Welcome to it, our visit. But they opened it to the world, and it's still that way today. Anybody that wants to come to a Quaker meeting is welcome, and who and what we are is shared. Our gift has been centered in silence since the beginning. And I think silence is perhaps one of the oldest forms of spiritual practice that predates history. I believe in every tradition, there's some aspect, some area within the tradition where silence is honored. People will go on spirit journeys and so forth to go away, to be away by themselves, to go into that inner place. And friends have taken that from the Christian perspective of the Christ within us that can speak and teach us without going through an intermediary. So that is the Quaker gift to the world, I believe. And so we'll move on to this next slide, which is the surging call. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with Thomas Kelly. Thomas Kelly is a 20th century Quaker who was a mystic and speaks from the mystic tradition within Friends. And he talks about this connection between us and the what he terms eternal love. And this is something that is going on within the heart. It's a call from that eternal Christ hidden within our very souls, and that is always looking to be in connection with us, to guide us, to love us, and to lead us to our deepest and truest selves. Now, this deepest and truest selves is not a term that is strictly held by Quakers. That's a term that a lot of traditions use. And we hear people like Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr is a Franciscan monk, friar, who is a mystic. And Richard Rohr has a community that is bringing what he terms non-duality, trying to spread that to members of the world. And he comes from the Christian perspective. Thomas Merton also uses the term true self. Thomas Merton died in the 70s, I believe, in Bangkok. He was attending an East-West monastic conference. And so he was seeing the correlation, the connection between the Eastern ways and the Western ways in this level of being. So he often talks about going within to the true self as well. And so, we look at this, and where does this place Quakers in the expanse of the traditions of the world? I'm posing that to you as a question, if you care to respond. Sir, you've joined us recently. Is your name Carol? Is that you? Yeah. I want to welcome you with us as well. A friend in North Carolina, Jack Kirk, he's been a long time Quaker minister, and he said this teaching of Thomas Kelly's was the foundation of his ministry his entire life, ever since he had stepped in. He's a writer and a minister in North Carolina, and that this teaching that he got through Thomas Kelly became the foundation for his life. Any comments on this?
It does fit in with George Fox and talking about the light within.
How so? Yeah, the connection with the light within.
Right, that he believed there was that of God in everyone. Mm-hmm. And if he could talk to that, feel at one with that, mm-hmm. that he always has the presence of God within him, and he can act through that, from that in my mind connects with what you're talking about.
Yeah. Receive direction and guidance and inspiration. By the way, I think that there are a lot of traditions that see the divine within the individual. I don't think that is something that us Quakers that's not unique to us. I believe there are a lot of traditions that hold that, and that's one of the connectors, that we have these various connections that we find at all different levels. And I'd like to look for the bridges rather than the hedges. My my joy in life is helping people connect with the divine. And I think that when that happens, we start to view the world around us different. You can't view the world the same when you start seeing, experiencing the divine within you and around you, and know that that is the same experience of others on the planet. So it kind of changes the world view in my respect. But this is not always easy to talk about. And one of the things about describing the spiritual experiences of silence is that it's difficult to find the words for that. Now, I like to think of it as like, we try to catch the sea. If we want to gather up the sea, and if we take a net out and throw it out into the water in the sea, the net doesn't catch the sea. Or if we wanted to catch a butterfly or a moth or something, and we took a net and went out, we can catch the butterfly or the moth, but we're not going to catch the air. And it takes a container to do this. And we are that container. And I think that was kind of what George Fox and others in all these different traditions and different ways discovered, that we're the container. We're that residing place that holds the divine. And that's true. But describing what occurs is not easy. And does anybody want to talk to that? We have to use metaphor and allegory often. It's like this. Or we use a term, light is an example. Light is an example to try to describe what is experienced inside. What are some other metaphors that are used?
As I said, I'm in Puerto Rico, and I've been here on and off for a year now. And instantly I started looking at pigeons. Pigeons are really interesting animals. And once I visited a friend in hospital, and then I went to sit on the wall in front of the sea, just to look at the sea. And this pigeon sat next to me and stayed there for 30 minutes. I mean, I grabbed a camera at some stage and videoed it for about 5 minutes, but he was there for 30 minutes. He was not going to leave till I left. That was, I tell you, it was amazing.
Did the pigeon have anything to say?
He looked at me. He just kept looking at me, it was as if he wanted to make sure I was okay. That's really what it felt like. Just sort of sitting there.
Were you in distress at the time?
I really wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, nothing worse than usual. I mean, I certainly, no, I really wasn't, but I really appreciated him being there.
Uh-huh. The companionship?
Lovely. Absolutely. Absolutely lovely. He kept looking at me. Wait, what's going on? Yeah. So that was interesting. But animals are like that, though. I mean, we see things in animals. We see things in science.
Yeah, that is true.
You have to look for it, but you have to look for it. I remember when in 1995 I had a small baby and three sons and a daughter, and I was about to lose my job. Everything was miserable, and my husband lived in Germany, and I was really, really pretty upset. And then I walked through the snow. It was in January, and I saw this rose blooming. Mm-hmm. And it felt like my father was telling me, "Hey, it's okay."
Yeah,
that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You brought up a very, very important point there, is learning how to look for it.
Yes.
that is that's a key in a very large way to feeling this connection with the world around you, the inner and the outer. We also often can dismiss what we're experiencing inside as, oh, that's just a crazy thought, or, God really going to talk to me? Or like you say, this animal shows up, or something like that will draw your attention to something else. And the wind kicking up all of a sudden that has Carl Jung has a term for something called synchronicity, right? When seemingly totally unrelated things occur. And the thing that makes them important is what? There's a significance to the individual. The individual draws a significance between the event or the occurrence. And so, yeah, learning to see, learning to hear, listen. And that's kind of what we're talking about today in learning to listen. This is a precursor to listening, we might say, is cultivating a state of silence. Let me take a minute. I want to share with you a little bit of my religious philosophy, my theological position, if you might say, that is the foundation for where I built this for myself in my life journey, okay? And I call it divine loneliness. So in my meditations and my pondering and so forth, what developed for me was this image of a divine being that is totally alone before any creation whatsoever. And that's an almost unimaginable state for a human to imagine, where there is only one thing and nothing else. And in this self-awareness of this viewing, and I use the term for this as God, this being as God. That is my term for the Godhead, is God. I've searched for other terms that might be better for me or others, and I haven't found it. So I continue to use this. But in this self-awareness and aware of being alone, there was this huge, immense divine loneliness. And in this developed a reflective self known as the Son, or as John's Gospel tells us, the Word. And between these was love. And in this state of love, the three, there never is any discord, or there's always total alignment, always total love between that. And that beingness, that Godhead, is where creation developed from. And creation was developed as an act of love. Now, in this, I guess I'll have to call it a theory. Is that right? Would that be the proper word? In my theology, it's my personal theology is what it is. It's my personal theology. So in this personal theology, the divine loneliness and love creates the humans as part of creation. And humans create various philosophies and religions that they use to reconnect with this first cause. Now, in my model, God, or that from which all comes, the Godhead, that Father, Mother, Son, the love that goes between, that wholeness. Never imagine that anything of its creation would ever separate itself from that perfect state. And the philosophies and the religions of the world are attempts to rediscover and reconnect with that initial state of wholeness. And the mystical traditions point us towards what Richard Rohr, the Franciscan I mentioned earlier, calls non-duality. And I believe that in a way that this is the gift, the charism of the Religious Society of Friends. Our waiting worship, our way of being together in the silence, is an endeavor to a state of non-duality, a state of wholeness. We call it in Quaker terms unity, when we come to unity. And so this mystical tradition that we find in all the ages through the world, in the various parts of the world, coming through all the traditions of our that we recognize and know, have as that center core this reconnection, this elevating our state of being from the base to the divine. And it's the key to it is that they're all relational, showing us ways to be in relation with ourselves, with others, and with the divine. And we'll look at this a little bit more. But I just want to kind of give you this little foundation piece from my own theological perspective, because it might help to make sense of these other things that we talk about. All right? And so we have this inner and outer world. And there was an interesting thing about Friends, is that Friends helped bring a balance to this. Back in George Fox's time, the religious view of the world was that humans were here on earth and they were, sinning mortals. And God was out there somewhere. God had started the mechanism of creation going, and God sat up there and people sat down here, and God was, keeping track of everything. And then we were going to pay for it later. Well, Thomas Gates, he's a Quaker there in Pennsylvania. He wrote a Pendle Hill pamphlet called Reclaiming the Transcendent. And what he's talking about in this is the Friends discovered the Christ within them. George Fox did, and taught other people how to discover it within themselves. The predominant view at that time was that God was transcendent. He was out there. He was not within us. So the early Quakers put a balance out there to bring that within. So they now had Christ within and the God of the universe, the cosmos. And Thomas Gates tells us that a big part of this contribution to George Fox and the early Friends was that the belief that Christ came to teach his people himself. And so this was what was known as, in Christian theology, you have the return of Christ is anticipated. And so what they believed at that time was that Christ was living in the midst of them. So Christ had returned. They also, after quite some time, realized that it wasn't the return that they expected. It wasn't the full transformation of earth into the heavenly sphere and those sort of things. So they started holding the belief that we have Christ within us and with us in our midst, but there'll also be this other coming that it's future, and we will wait for it. But Thomas Gates talks about the balancing that Quakers brought to the Christian tradition. So we have the Christ within and the Christ without. Now, I do want to point out, that's why I've kind of phrased this as the Christian tradition. That, again, is not unique, to the Christian tradition. When we look back to the early Celtic tradition, the Celts being in parts of Ireland, France, England, Scotland, Wales, there was a group that had come from the Germanic areas of Europe and moved across and settled in Western Europe, the far Western Europe. They had a mixture of Christianity that included some from the Eastern Christian tradition. And when Patrick helped develop Christianity in Ireland, what was different with that from others was he allowed the indigenous people to remain the indigenous people. All right. They didn't have to become something else. They incorporated this into their own life. So when the Romans came and conquered Europe, they didn't get that far. The Romans weren't in Ireland. The Romans didn't get to Wales. They didn't go up into Scotland. They got part of the way maybe, and they got up into England and they went, but they were stopped in the northern part of England. So you had this group of Christians who maintained a different take on Christianity. And if you read the Lorca, like it's known as St. Patrick's breastplate, he is talking about, he's praying for protection, and he's talking about the Christ within, the Christ above, the Christ behind, to my right, to my left. And this was an integrated Christ, that God wasn't just out there somewhere. God was alive with them and within their life and within the world that was around them, which is a very different take than what the Roman Church had. And so we have in various places around the world how these threads continue to thrive. Even when they're being pushed down one place, they're going to come up somewhere else. And so that is the part on balance. And like I said, this thread that gets pushed one place shows up another. There's this silence and this experience of the divine comes to us from many paths. And there are mystics in each tradition. And these mystics help us to be the container, and that the individuals that called to this way of life, there are many different paths. And that, I think, when I was talking about Thomas Merton at the monastic conference in Thailand, where the monks from all the different traditions were coming, that's what they were recognizing amongst them and between them. And so I'd like to ask you to share your perspective of what some of these other traditions are that incorporate silence as a spiritual practice. And maybe we could name some of those. And maybe some practices that you draw upon that may be unique to drawn from another tradition, or maybe you had a tradition as a child growing up, and it's a part of you. I think that it's one of the beautiful things I think about exploring different traditions is they add layers. We always have what we start with. And excuse me, but I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but there are two of them, and you never know when they will pop up. So, yeah.
Buddhism.
Yeah.
Buddhism.
Sure.
Yeah. In fact, that's how I came to be a Quaker.
Is that right?
I was going to on Sundays I was going to the Episcopal Church, and I had 3 sons at that stage, and my husband, as I said, lived in Germany. And I saw an ad for a Buddhist study group, and it said free childcare, and that got me. That was it on a Saturday night. I just thought, this is perfect. So for a year and a half, I was part of a Quaker, a Buddhist study group, which was great. And during that time, this was 1990 and 1991, we started bombing Iraq, and it was just horrendous. So anyway, after that, and after I decided I couldn't be an Episcopalian anymore in New Jersey because they thought the war was a good idea, I took the children to Quaker meeting, and that was it. Yeah. But it was the same thing. I mean, we would sit and be silent, and we had these meditations, like focus on your breath coming in, going out, and there were various other meditations like that, and walking meditations. So it really helped when I started going to Quaker meeting because I knew what to do. And
yeah. Thanks. Who else?
So I'm actually planning to attend a silent retreat that's coming up in the spring. So it's in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, and it's a new school of thought that I am not familiar with. It is new to me. It's called Vipassana. I believe it's part of the Hindu tradition. So I'm looking forward to that in the spring. And that's going to be a silent retreat for, I believe it's about 10 days. And
Wow.
And so you're encouraged to, I mean, they will have like these lessons where you listen, but a lot of the day is spent in meditation, and you are encouraged not to talk to anyone else, and you're supposed to put your phone away and all that. So it's going to be challenging, but I'm looking forward to it. I want that disconnection for some time and try to seek the light within, which is a very similar concept in their tradition as well. So
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I hope you enjoy that, and I'd love to hear about your experience afterwards if you ever would care to share it. Yeah.
Sure, I would love to. It's in mid-April. So.
Yeah, but is this typical of Hindu practice?
So Hinduism, to my understanding, is so diverse that it's hard to say, and I don't know a lot about it. So this is, but I believe even this practice is sort of non-denominational. Like they stress that you don't have to be Hindu to be part of this. So
Yeah. I believe that Hindu religion is the oldest recorded religion that's been going on continuously, and like Talha said, it is such a broad and diverse and deep. It's a deep. I was fortunate to be in India for 3 weeks on a contextual theology class, and we went across northern India, visiting all the different traditions within the country, and it's really an incredible and beautiful thing to be able to take that amount of time and sit with some of the teachers in all these traditions. But you could spend a lifetime in any one of them, and that's the same way it is with Christianity and with Islam. Any tradition, it's a lifetime journey we can. It's good to learn about other practices, And sometimes we find something that's really a good fit for me, and I can incorporate that into my practice. But we can't be everything, and we can't do everything well. And if we go from here to there to there to there to there, how do we ever sink into the depth that we're looking for? But understanding some of all the traditions and learning, it helps respect and appreciate and welcome those traditions as part of our world. And that hopefully will be the goal eventually, that will help to bring peace to the world, as it can happen through the religions of the world. If the religions of the world can appreciate what each one brings to the table, it'll be the best feast you could ever imagine. Yeah.
And this discussion reminded me of a childhood memory. So I was raised Muslim, and so in Islam, as you know, every year there is a holy month of Ramadan, and basically in that there's an optional tradition that usually older people follow because they have more time on their hands, and so you can the last 10 days of Ramadan, or you can also shorten it to 5 or 3. I forget the exact numbers, but there's like a certain part of Ramadan where you can sit in silence. So and during that time, you just pray. You don't talk to anyone. And usually some family member will be giving you food, and you just stay in your room, or you can also go to the mosque and stay there for the period of 10 days or so. So my grandfathers and my grandmothers would often do that once a year.
Wow.
And I never thought of it as this like silence, from the perspective of silent worship until just now when we were talking about this. So
that's neat. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's great.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, this kind of helps us move into the next section, which is this, what are we talking about here? Meditation or contemplation. And as you can see on the screen, I'll just let you read that for yourself. And there are many ways. I'm sure we could probably spend a full day talking about this, but for our purpose today, I'm suggesting these two definitions. I'll give you just a minute to look them over, and then I'll take the screen away. Okay, that's not a lot to read. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Daniel, I can comment that my experience of meditation is quite different from yours.
Okay. Say more, please.
That when I meditate anyway, I go into a space of silence, but sometimes I have an experience. Like one time I was in Florida at an ashram where everybody was there to be silent, but part of the experience of going to this ashram was meeting a much more experienced meditator. And one of the things he did when you went there, as part of a greeting, he would put his hands on your head. And he asked if I felt anything. And I said, well, not really. And then he put his hand on my fontanelle. And it was like having a little heart beating inside my head. It was amazing. And I seriously did feel a physical connection to some kind of divine energy. And for me, that, or the silence, the absolute silence, which does include connection, is meditation.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak to this?
I'm confused about the difference. I mean, I'm on my own, and I like being on my own. So I'm sort of contemplating and meditating pretty much all day long.
Okay. Yeah. So Did you have more? Okay. I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that sometimes we will meditate on something. There's a term that you may or may not be familiar with called Lectio Divina. And that is a practice of taking a reading, something to read, and you read it, and then you sit and meditate upon it. And you might do that 3 times. And it might only be 1, 2, or 3 lines. It's very, small bite at a time. So you could take a book and spend 2 years going through that book by means of Lectio Divina. Okay. Yeah. Was Carol trying to speak?
Yeah, I thought I saw something, but I think
Okay.
he's on mute.
Okay.
Ray, you're muted.
Maybe trying.
Yeah.
Well, Carol, should you be able to get
Ray.
unmuted, please just speak up. And
It's Ray.
I didn't catch that. Thank you so much for pointing that out to us. And he perhaps will figure out. There you go. You're unmuted now. Please. Yeah. Hi. Welcome.
Thank you. My experience is that God speaks on his own time, in his own way, about what he's interested in.
Uh-huh.
All I have to do is listen.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes, that is true. And that's what in this, we're going to move into the next slide. Let me move on into the next slide. I think that will help make the point that I'm trying to make. Here we go. All right. Silence or quiet. So we talk about meditation or contemplation. Maybe there's not a difference. I think there is a difference, though, in silence or quiet. And so here's a definition that I found online that I thought fit pretty well with what we're talking about. And it talks about the difference between, quiet being something more that it involves other people, whereas silence is an interior thing. And that's the point that we're trying to make here right now, is that whether we call it meditating or contemplating or whatever it is that we are engaged in, what we're talking about here today with silence is creating a state, a condition. It's like a movement or a portal that is personal yet universal. It's here, it's this and nothing else. It's purity. All the stuff of the world is put aside for a minute. We're opening ourselves to be a receptacle. This container we talked about earlier. So that, as our friend just expressed, when the divine is ready to speak, we're ready to listen. So I think if we go back to where we talked earlier about this whole thing being about a relational aspect between us, ourselves, others, the divine, we can get so busy in life that we don't see or hear. As you were talking about, you saw that pigeon there. You recognize that pigeon was being in relationship with you. It was like it was being a companion for that time. And you were aware of that. And so what we're talking about here, the difference between silence and quiet, is that state of being. And we're not just being polite. We're not just talking. We're being quiet because of everybody else around us, like being in a library or something like that. But it's creating this inner state where we can be in an airport or sitting at the beach and people walking by us, or even in an office or a restaurant. And we can have that inner quiet regardless of what else is going on. Yeah. So that is, I want to look at this one more time. So is this making sense to you?
Sorry, what does MFW stand for?
I'm sorry, meeting for worship.
Okay.
So I'll be happy to explain that to you, but the Quaker meeting is known as a meeting for worship. And so that is a specified time and place to come together to sit in what's known as waiting worship, which is done in silence. So yeah.
Right. I believe this morning we had the meeting for worship and then the meeting for business, right, Lois? We had both. Yeah.
There you go. Oh, you really are jumping in the deep end here today, aren't you? Yeah. You like to swim in the depths. No, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you.
Why don't we take 3 minutes here? And I'm going to time it so that we do. And let's just be quiet for 3 minutes. Let's
Should we
just
be quiet
do
or be silent?
Just be quiet. We'll just be quiet for 3 minutes and see what that's like. Okay? So that was a 3-minute time just sitting and being quiet. How was that? I'm wondering, as being Quakers or having other prior practices in meditation, did we just sit and be quiet, or did we take the opportunity to go into a more meditative state of mind? Yeah, you're shaking your head. You started meditating automatically, did you? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool. I'd like to look at another time and place in a different group of people who have spent a long, long time in exploring the mystical ways of life and silence in their life. And this comes to us from the Eastern Church. And there's a text that is known as the Philokalia. And it's a group of texts that have been kept from the 4th century to the 15th century. Okay, so for over 1,000 years, they combined the records of these monks who were living apart from the world. And this mystical school, they call it, they use, this is an introduction to one of the publications. But in this introduction, he talks about words that to a Quaker would stand out. An inward prayer. We talk about inward light. The early Quakers saw this as not something that was starting from within themselves, but was coming from without and coming in. And it was an inward direction to their heart. And talks about the seed, the divine seed implanted in the hearts. And that's a Quaker term that is very familiar to us. The seed within that can either be cultivated and sprouted and grown or lay dormant. But the interesting thing here that I like about this is that this man that's writing the introduction to the text is talking about we need to live a life that sets us up to where we can then develop this inner life. So some of the terms they were using would be what, as friends, would be talk about that we would be living the spices out in our life, living a moral and practical and religious life, not just in our daily prayer life and so forth within our meeting, but out in the world. And what this person was saying, that the inner and the outer complement each other, and that people that focus too much on the works of the world, be they good works, they may be totally unselfish individuals that are doing everything they can to create a better world. But if the inner practice is not maintained and developed, they're going to run into the risk of burnout. And we hear that happening to people all the time. Talk to anybody in the medical profession today, and they talk about how hard it is and the burnout that they're experiencing. Educators feel the same way. And so it's very important that we talk about this balance that we had earlier, finding that spot between the inner and the outer. It was referred to earlier as an isthmus, that little stretch of land that connects between the two. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. And I also wonder, if all that we're talking about, could this be considered like an awakening as a person walks through the journey of life and is exploring the inner world and connecting it with the outer world? Is that something that could be considered an awakening? What do you think?
Daniel Pink Dandelion talks about a difference between inner and inward experience. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that difference.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know what Pink Dandelion's take is, but we have in the early Quaker text, if you read that, they almost always talk about the inward life. So it was a relational thing between that, the vine outside of us, the whole thing that's within and outside both simultaneously, but this relationship, this connection, and the inward light would come and fill them and help them to see, as we talked about in the experiment with light, where they might be having challenges in themselves and in the life around them, and help them understand how to clear up these things that are hindering us in our development. And then it helps us out in the world. Okay? So somewhere along the way, we started talking about the inner light as like it's something that is only personal to us. It's ours, it's mine. And we each have it. But it's a more personal thing. And I'm not sure exactly how that transition occurred. It is perhaps one way. There's not just one way to approach these things. We have to look at it almost as a matrix. It goes this way, it goes that way, it goes in all directions at once. But if I'm only focused on the inner light, if I go in and I meditate, and so this, back up once. step and talk about what happens when we meditate. I don't know what happens with you when you meditate, and you don't know what's going on with me. Where I am, my experience, I can try to explain it to you. That's what we were talking about earlier. You know, sometimes we come up with what we might say are concrete thoughts and ideas and that sort of thing. Okay. But for one person, it's a purely psychological event. Okay. They've taken this and they've released everything that's around them. And for them, it's a psychological exercise. For another person, it's a little bit more than that. They're connecting with their soul, and they may have a different perspective. And then for another, they're being open to the divine to come in and guide them. So in one, you would be perhaps talking about an inner light, to another, an outward light that becomes an inward light. The light of Christ that's in the world is now within me. And some may call it the Holy Spirit, some may call it Krishna. You know, what happens with each individual? So again, we go back to many paths, and what I've had to do for myself, I found it helpful for me. I was born and raised in the Catholic tradition. I've expanded that, but I maintain my practice as a Christian. And I learn from and appreciate and have borrowed from other traditions. Okay? But I suppose that for me, I go more towards like what Richard Rohr and Thomas Merton talk about. You talk about the self with the lowercase s and self with the capital S. So I have a capital S self within me, and my egoic self can connect with that, and through that, I connect with the divine. Is that the only way? No, there are other paths. I can, it can happen walking. It can happen sitting at the beach and a pigeon walk up and sit down beside you. So it's a very interesting idea. I mean, a concept, the different terms between inner light and inward light. But I don't know if I helped or confused things, but I think it depends on the context in which we're exploring. And I think that theological context makes a difference as to how we approach it. Any other thoughts on this? Please. I mean, this is a conversation, and we have a lot of wisdom here, so I want to hear from you.
But my thought is that to serve God, we have to be interruptible. We can't be so caught up in our own plans that we can't hear the voice of God.
Right. That's a very good way to put it. We have to be interruptible. I like that.
I just always have this vision of a light in a path. I do a great deal of walking, so I mean, I'm on paths a lot. And of course, when I'm in New Jersey, I'm generally in the woods. But that's what I'm always seeing when I'm in silent worship. It's looking at a path and realizing that there's one way to go that's a good way.
Right.
And don't go the other ways.
Right, right.
So it's actually literally.
Yeah. There could be dangerous paths. That's true. There could be dangerous paths. Yeah.
But I really find, though, that meeting for worship twice a week, which we do, and we do it on Zoom, is incredibly helpful.
Uh-huh.
It just straightens me out. I feel like I'm getting back on track. And that's it's really, really important.
Yeah.
And that's, and often some people don't understand that.
Right.
And it's hard to explain.
Yeah. There's a different energy in the collective experience of that, isn't there? Yes.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And
Definitely.
that's an interesting thing. Some people have difficulty experiencing that through Zoom, but when we're talking about the spirit that is universal, you can be anywhere in the world and connect in that way. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was taken away from where I was born when I was 6 years old. So I've always been connecting with people remotely. I mean, all my life.
Yeah.
So Zoom to me is natural. I mean,
Yeah.
better than writing letters.
It's easier, yes.
Which is what.
And it gets there quicker too.
Yeah, right. So I mean, I think it's terrific medium, really terrific.
Well, this kind of moves us into the next slide. So, what we've talked a lot here about today is getting to a place where we can be interrupted, as was so nicely put. I like that. And another way to say that is we move from our head to our heart. And we've already talked about some of the things that I wanted to talk about here in this, but Thomas Merton, the monk who I mentioned, who, by the way, is lived at a monastery in Kentucky, which is where I'm from, and I've spent an 8-day retreat at that monastery a few years back. But Thomas Merton talks about it this way. He says the concept of the heart refers to the deepest psychological ground of one's personality, the inner sanctuary where self-awareness goes beyond analytical reflection and opens up into the metaphysical and theological confrontation with the abyss of the unknown, yet present one, who is more intimate to us than we are to ourselves. I mean, that's saying a lot there, which in some ways reflects what I was talking about of this being more like a matrix than a straight line, where there are these convergence of different things. We have our psychological self, we have our physical self, we have our spiritual self, we have the world around us, we have the world that we've made up, our perspective of the world. And these all come together. And the head wants to run it all. And that can get us into some trouble. So the idea is to become interruptible, to move to the heart. The heart is what's open to the divine. The head may want to know. The head may actually very much want it. But that's not the portal so much as through the heart. Doesn't mean we can't receive inspiration through our head. We've all done that. We've all had inspiring moments. Excuse me. We're trying to think of something. We're working on an idea, and an inspiration comes, and it's wonderful. But what we're talking about here today, the silence, is one way we can cultivate a portal for this to happen. So, if you're up to it, let's take 5 minutes and spend that 5 minutes cultivating a state of silence rather than just being quiet. Now, like I think that you all did automatically anyway. You went into that state, but let's do it intentionally. And we'll come back in 4 or 5 minutes and we'll talk about that. I believe you are all experienced at some level in this, so I won't go over any of the little helpful hints that we have for going into that state. I'll be happy to talk about it later if we want to. So let's take 4 to 5 minutes to release the thoughts to create that stillness, that open, silent container, and just be where we are right now in this moment. Oh, did you notice any difference in that experience compared to the earlier one? The difference between when we just took a quiet minute or took time to be in silence? Was there any difference for you?
It seemed like it was no time at all.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
It seemed like no time at all.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
That's
Yeah.
right. It did. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking at my cup.
Yeah, right. Be still and know, right?
Be still and know. Yes. That's always a prompt for me during the day.
Yeah. Is everybody familiar with where that prompt, that quote comes from?
Psalm 46.
Be still and know that I am God. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I had a different experience, I will say. When we stopped just for the quiet, I did not close my eyes nor go into any attempt to really be still. I just didn't say anything for a few minutes. And with this experience, I was immediately aware of my body because of what I'm doing right now. It takes energy. And I noticed that up here in my head, there was, I could tell it's really been working, you know? And as I started to relax, I heard my back crack once, you know? And so I was starting to shift and go into that place. And that's quite a jump from what I'm doing right now to a state of silence. So I wouldn't expect it to happen in 2 or 3 minutes, but the process started, and it was different than when I was just quiet and I was paying attention to the kids that were outside at the time and various things going on. And I was thinking about what was coming up next and those sort of things. So for me, it was a different experience. But I did keep my eyes open though the first time, and I did recognize that everybody had their eyes closed and seemed to be meditating. But we are drawing to the end of our time, and I know I've talked an awful lot. I was supposed to leave time for questions, and so we have a couple of minutes, and we can always stay after the recording is ended. And I can stay. Lois has made me co-host. She can go if she needs to. So if anybody wants to stay, or any questions, any thoughts, comments?
So a few slides ago, you mentioned another school of thought that was like the ancestor of Quaker theology. What was that name again? I forgot.
I said it could be. I didn't say it was.
It was potentially, yeah.
Philokalia, Phil. Let me make sure I'm spelling it right. Kalia.
Got it.
Philokalia. Now, the interesting thing about that, yeah, thank you. In that tradition, they wouldn't accept anybody in it that wasn't grounded in the religious practices of that community, because they felt that that was necessary in order to move into the other part of their tradition. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Another one that is very close to what Quakers do is called cloud of unknowing, the cloud of unknowing. Yeah.
The Cloud of Unknowing?
Yes.
Wow, I've never heard of it before. Very interesting.
Ever heard of that? That was
Yes.
written by an English monk
Yeah,
who has remained anonymous,
I see.
like in the 15th century.
Wow.
Yeah, towards the end of the 14th. I'm just looking it up right now.
Okay.
It's
And
interesting.
there's another text that follows it, the book of what's it called? You'll find it if you've found that already. But the book of I'm sorry, I can let you know
Is
if
that
you
the
want to
book
reach
of
it.
Privy Counseling?
Privy Counseling, yeah, exactly, yeah. It kind of explains what the other one talks about in more detail. But it was written by an anonymous monk as guidance for another. So it's instructional.
I'm remembering a book by a religious person who, it's quite well known, but I can't remember what it's called. But this man was told to pray without ceasing. And he kept walking around saying, pray without ceasing. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's a book.
Well,
Yeah.
there's that's taken out of scripture. You know, we're advised to pray without ceasing. And so this the Hezekiahist, which is the group that Philokalia comes from, they have what's known as, have you ever heard of the Jesus prayer? It goes something like, Lord Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner. They would say that continuously, all day long. And that was their way. There are other methods of praying without ceasing too. And Brother Lawrence, I don't know if you've heard of him, but Brother Lawrence was another monk who was known to stay in a continuous state of prayer while he was working in the kitchen. And so his just constant conversation and being open to God, you know, just talking to God as he would work and so forth, which I think more people than we realize do that, especially people who have a slower pace that aren't engaging with others, maybe engage with the divine through their day. There's one last slide I'd like to share with you. This showed up to me just last week. I'd never seen or heard of it before. And it's a song by this state, and it's called Silent Awakening. There's a song by Tina Malia, and this is the text of the song. And it goes, I dreamt I was born a girl, living alone in the world. Passing the hours away, I looked into the face of sorrow, tempted by the taste of tomorrow and the scent of yesterday. But that was only a dream of a dream. This world is not what it seems. We are the roots of the banyan tree. We are love offered on the wing that stretches across eternity. We are a chord in life's symphony. We are the silent awakening. I dreamt that I could not find you, always a step behind you. Could not see your face, wandering around the maze of illusion's dusty haze. A soul with no resting place, and only love can lift the veil away. Only love can take its place. And I have traveled long and far just to come home to your grace. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this, my joy with you today, for being here. I hope that you have gotten something from it. I know I have. I've learned from you today. I always do, and that's the beauty of it.